amazing too.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.
Gary.
John, how are you?
I'm doing well. We got a lot of automotive history on today's show.
An exciting show, yeah. I mean, and I've got like this fresh off the press copy of Road and Track because
an actual printed version.
Yeah, printed version because we got Mike Austin.
It's on. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's on. Like the digital version, I think is out yesterday, and so it's in on newsstands and in mailboxes any day now.
And Mike did a story on our guest here, Matt Anderson, curator of transportation at the Henry Ford Museum. So when you all go get your copies of Road and Track, go to the last page, and here's this piece that.
And I want to note this was just beautiful kismet because I did not know that I was going to be on today when I talked to Matt, and I'm sure you didn't book him because of that coincidence.
Yeah, and then the issue came out just in time for this all to come together.
Just all comes together here on AutoLine After Hours. Yeah. So Matt, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks. My pleasure to be here.
Matt, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is a couple of months ago, you were one of the speakers at the SAE's Propulsion Conference. And you dug out some, I thought, really interesting insights as to the very early days of the automobile, the horseless carriage, and how things had evolved. Well, one of the things that you got into was maybe there's lessons today's industry can learn going back in history to those very early days. And one thing that hit me was, if you go back to the very early part of the 20th century, as the horseless carriage first started to appear, there was a lot of people who just hated them, despised it. Get a horse, was the common refrain that a motorist might have heard back then. And it seems to me maybe there's some lessons that today's industry can learn because of there's a lot of people out there who absolutely despise electric cars. You pick it up from there. Am I grasping for straws here, or are there some connections and lessons?
No, I think you're onto something there. And you're right. There was some hesitancy and some reluctance around the automobile right at the turn of the 20th century. And part of that, frankly, was a class issue, right? Cars were very expensive at that time. So if you had one, by definition, you were probably pretty well off. So that was part of the issue. But also, they were noisy, they were smelly, they were just plain difficult to drive, shifting gears, advancing spark, having to change a flat tire almost guaranteed anytime you went out. So all of that played into some of the reluctance to adopt automobiles early on. But a lot of those problems got knocked out pretty early. And I would say by 1905, 1906 at the latest, folks are really interested in wanting a car. There's envy, but it's not envy at the money. It's envy because I want my automobile now too.
And then there were lower priced models that started to come out too. Henry Ford famously with the Model T. It wasn't the only one, but that really opened up the automobile to the masses.
Yeah, absolutely. And the curved dash Oldsmobile before that was really the first car kind of targeted at a middle-class market, we'll say. And you're right, Henry Ford just exploited that, obviously very successfully with the Model T.
So is it just an issue of people being able to get into a vehicle that changed their perception of it? I mean, because you were saying that there were, pushbacks, smelly, noisy, flat tires. I mean, none of that went away. I mean, you still had that, right?
Yeah, to some degree, though, it got better, certainly by 1910 and into the mid-teens. But I think some of it, too, was just people were eager to adopt the new technology, and horses had some disadvantages that people came to realize pretty quickly, too. You've got to pay to board a horse, to feed a horse, whether you're using it or not, whereas the car's only costing you money if it's up and running. And then there's the issue of the, shall we say, exhaust that horses leave behind, which is notorious. The emissions, yes.
It was a different emission story, too.
Absolutely, yeah.
A lot of people don't realize this, but horses and horse-drawn carriages were actually very noisy, at least in city streets. If they were on cobblestones or any kind of paved road, the steel horseshoes, the steel bands on the wheels of carts, made a hell of a racket.
Now that's charming, John.
And now
go around Central Park and
yeah. But that's only because you hear an occasional horse and an occasional carriage. But I was early in my career the editor-in-chief of a magazine called Automotive Industries. We could trace our roots back to a magazine that started in 1895 called The Horseless Age, and my then predecessor, a guy named Mr. Ingersoll, had written an editorial in the first issue of The Horseless Age in 1895, And it was like, oh, these horseless carriages are going to be so much better. We're not going to have this emissions problem. It's going to be so much quieter than it is today. It's going to be far safer than all the accidents that we have right now. And of course, with 100 years plus of hindsight, boy, was he wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. We've just traded one set of problems for another set of issues around the automobile, obviously. But people were just thinking about the issues that the horses were causing at that time, and we're eager to kind of break away from that. And as we said, by 1905, 1910, the middle class is certainly entering the automotive market, and it won't be long after that before the working class gets in as well, when Henry kicks off the moving assembly line about 1913, 1914.
So this is something that's always kind of fascinated me too. And if I have this wrong, I looked it up a long time ago, but in terms of per capita, there weren't a lot of horses. Not a lot of people had horses because of the stuff you guys mentioned. You need space, you need to board them, they need veterinary care. So we went from not everyone has a horse to, shortly after 1913, as you're mentioning, a lot of people have cars. Like that was a pretty rapid transformation just in the way people got around, right?
Yeah, I think there's a misconception thanks to movies and TV that, the sort of horse and carriage or buggy was the equivalent of the family car today. But you're right, particularly in the cities, most people didn't own horses. They relied on public transportation or just walked wherever they were going. But the automobile all of a sudden freed you to travel further distances. And to some extent, that had been kind of set up or predicted by the bicycle, which was incredibly popular in the 1890s. Again, because people could now travel where they wanted on their own schedules and go farther than they wanted to. So in a sense, the automobile is almost a bigger, better version of the bicycle.
Matt, go into that, because I think not a lot of people these days appreciate what the chain-driven pneumatic tire bicycle did for transportation, starting mainly in the 1880s.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of bicycle technology that went into the automobile. You mentioned the steel tube frames, which you see in early cars, pneumatic tires, chain drives, which were not all that uncommon on cars on the turn of the 20th century. So that's a part of it. There were even manufacturers who built bikes who then went into the auto industry. Pope famously, Rambler, Thomas Jeffrey. I mean, the Rambler name was used on bicycles before it ever appeared on automobiles. And now we think of it with the AMC cars of the 1960s.
I think
Peugeot.
Peugeot was, and though they didn't build automobiles, the Wright brothers went from bicycles to airplanes.
Yeah, so why did that happen? Do you have any idea? I mean, why they didn't do automobiles? I mean,
by all accounts, Orville was a bit of a gearhead, so he was interested in automobiles, but the Wrights got into aviation because that was the big problem of the age, and they were Wilbur, I think, was really fascinated by it. But yeah, a lot of bicycle technology went into the first airplanes as well. They have steel tube frames on the wing spars there, chain drive running the propellers, so the bike, I think, gets overlooked sometimes for as much as it contributed to the 20th century.
How did that history, was the bicycle, I got to believe, was more of a European thing that then came to the U.S.?
Yeah, the earliest bicycles were developed in Europe, and then the technology kind of migrated to the United States. And all the major advancements, I would say, really took place in Europe, starting with the addition of pedals on the front with the velocipede, and then the high wheel bikes of the 1870s, and then replaced by the chain and sprocket system. So now you have what they called safety bikes with wheels of the same size. But we forget what a boom it was here in the 1890s. It was selling millions of bikes every year and using some early mass production techniques as well, which would then be adopted by the auto industry.
You mean moving assembly line kind of manufacturing techniques? Or
to
what?
some extent. The Pope Company in Connecticut probably had the most advanced factory for bicycles of its time, but they were producing parts using mass production techniques with specialized machines, building them in enormous quantities, and rudimentary moving assembly line. Obviously, Henry Ford took it to a much farther extent a few years later, but the seeds were planted, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So any idea why there is a diversion from, like, you have bicycles, motorcycles, but then you have automobiles? Why wasn't there some consolidation there?
Yeah, that's a good question, and you're right. Some manufacturers go in those specific directions, and that's it. And there's a natural sort of bridge, I guess, from bicycles to motorcycles, right? You're just putting an engine on it, but automobiles kind of developed separately, right? Developed in Germany with Carl Benzon's Patentwagen and three-wheel initially, and I think a lot of that was just to accommodate the size of the engine, right? It's got to be a bigger chassis and a bigger platform. But as motors get smaller, bicycles and motorcycles, I should say, become more practical. But you're right, there is a real distinction in the early development of those two technologies.
Don't you have some car at the museum that predates the Benz wagon? I mean, that you might argue really is the first automobile.
We have an 1865 steam carriage built by Sylvester Roper, who interestingly later went on to build steam motorcycles as well. And you're right, that does predate the Benz Pottenwagen a little, but the difference, I think, is that it's steam powered for one, whereas Benz was working around the internal combustion engine. And also, Roper never had any imaginings of building this thing on a commercial scale or selling it to the public. It was literally a carnival attraction. You'd pay money to go watch this thing move under its own power, which must have been pretty exciting in 1865.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did this thing work? I mean, what was the heat source?
Well, that's the thing. We talk about the advantages of steam in electric cars, and one thing said for steam is was a proven technology at the turn of the 20th century, and it worked very well. Developed low torque. You didn't need to shift gears with a steam car, but a lot of people kind of forget that a steam car still requires some hydrocarbon fuel because you've got to heat up the water to make the steam in the first place. Why not cut out the technological middleman and just go straight to an internal combustion powered car or an ICE engine? So.
But it takes what, 20 to 30 minutes to build up the steam in these steam cars. So an internal combustion engine that fires right up with a hand crank or even an electric starter, so much more convenient than steam.
Absolutely. And you're right. It did take a while to build up ahead of steam. Some companies, White in particular, eventually developed flash boilers, which could heat up your water in about 90 seconds, 2 minutes. So kind of eliminated a lot of that problem. But the other issue was, finding soft water is easy here in the Midwest or in the East. It's tough finding soft water or water, period, out in the desert Southwest. So that was an issue that hampered the steam car as well.
How many cars do you actually have at the Henry Ford Museum?
We've got about 300, and I always say about because we have things like a chassis from a 1940 Oldsmobile, which had the automatic transmission, the first Hydromatic. We have a Ford GT, which is cut in two as a display piece for the Detroit Auto Show. So, it's up to you whether you want to call that whole car or not, but about 300 is a good figure.
So, Mike, you've been to lots and lots of car museums. I mean, how does their collection impress you?
The thing that I love about it is it does, this might sound obvious, it covers the history of the car and especially the mass-produced stuff. Like the thing I always remember is like, oh wow, they have a Chrysler minivan and they have cars you wouldn't normally see in a museum, but are this huge piece of history and like where the industry went. And also, there's definitely something there where everyone can go in and be like, oh, I remember that, or my parents had that.
And yeah, you've got some really rare pieces too, very expensive pieces. And how do you go about determining what should be in? Now, obviously, the museum's been around an awful long time, and you yourself, Matt, inherited a collection that's already there. I got to imagine, though, there's still pieces that you would like to add. What are they?
I always have a wish list of things that we should have, and a couple of things on that list. I would love an early Saturn S series, right? This idea of General Motors trying to copy the Japanese style and sort of way of producing automobiles, building them literally out of the Motor City in Tennessee. I would also love a Tesla Model S, right? The car that made electrics cool again, getting back to our original subject. So if anybody's out there and has one of those that they're looking to
those should be easy to find.
One would hope, yes. And certainly the Saturn sold in big numbers, and the Teslas, people seem to like them at the time. Early adopters buying those, but got to have one in the collection.
Is there anything rare that you would like to see in the collection?
It's interesting. The rarest cars tend to be the ones that were the most common at the time they were sold. Not too long ago, we acquired a Ford Mustang II, which is like nobody's idea of a dream car or a collector.
Amen
special.
To that.
Yeah, right. But these were cars that sold very, very well at the time, kept the Mustang brand alive. And there's this whole thing called the malaise era, right? As manufacturers were dealing with new emissions restrictions and technologies, and consumers are interested in fuel economy all of a sudden, and the cars just frankly weren't very good for a few years there. And nobody's collecting or saving that kind of stuff. We needed to have one in the museum to represent that era as much as we might like to forget it. So it was a great acquisition.
Oh, I was thinking that you were going to say some rare handcrafted body, a spectacular long limousine or sedan from the 1930s or something like that.
Yeah, well, that's one thing I think that sets our collection apart from others too. There's certainly other museums that go deeper into certain makes or models or types of cars. I don't know that anyone can touch our breadth because, on the one end, we've got a 78 Dodge Omni. The other hand, we have the 31 Bugatti Royale, speaking of very rare cars. So just about everything in between those two goalposts as well.
So it's an interesting thing, you're talking, Mike, that they have cars that are common, more or less. I mean, not necessarily exclusive, but you guys contextualize everything. I mean, if somebody goes to the museum and they walk through the displays, they can learn why there was this evolution, why different vehicles look the way they do. I mean, you guys, and you have house trailers and all kinds of transportation
Yeah,
equipment.
and that's the thing we always hope visitors kind of take away from our auto exhibits. You know, they're about cars, but they're really about people, right? And it's about how people have changed over the last 120, 130 years to meet the car's needs, and how the car has impacted every facet of our lives, where we work, where we play, how we eat, etc. So those kind of contextualizations are really, really important to the way we tell stories at the Henry Ford.
And the other thing I like too is it goes well beyond cars. And so you're the curator of transportation. You know, I probably took my first tour of the Henry Ford Museum when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and it made a lasting impression because you have these gigantic steam-powered locomotives inside the museum. Does that come under your purview?
It does, yeah. I get to work with the railroad equipment as well, and you're right, that Allegheny locomotive, that's the one thing I think
It's gigantic.
everybody sees it and remembers it when they come to visit the museum. It's always fun to see.
So what else besides trains includes your part as the curator of transportation?
Yeah, well, we've got a modest collection of airplanes. They're all civilian aircraft, all pre-World War II. But within those parameters, we've got important examples of just about every significant aircraft of that time. We do have some railroad locomotives. We have a diesel locomotive, a few steam locomotives. We have some cars as well. Henry, for a while, owned a railroad, the Detroit, Toledo, and Arlington. So we've got a locomotive and a caboose from that line. And we've got a couple of small watercraft as well. Nothing major, but steam launch, for example, from the turn of the 20th century, things like that. A little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's another interesting thing is that while people might think, oh, it's the Henry Ford Museum, therefore it's going to just be full of Fords. I mean, isn't it like you have the first Accord that came off the line?
Yes, that's on loan to us from Honda generously. But yeah, the very first Accord that was built in Ohio, so the first Japanese badged automobile built in the United States, which is an important piece for what it represents in shifting perceptions of cars, import versus domestic.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important point that you made there, Gary. It's not just Fords. It's in fact, Fords are probably in the minority of everything that's on display there, at least amongst the cars. You also have a racing display too. You guys get into the history of motor racing.
Yeah, we've collected from the beginning racing cars. Racing was an important part of the turn of the 20th century for improving the technology and proving the technology, right? It was some of the best advertising at the time, as it still is to some extent today. But we've got some pretty significant cars there. The 1908 or 1906 Locomobile, which won the 1908 Vanderbilt Cup. And 1908 is kind of seen as a turning point in the American industry because we win the Vanderbilt Cup. GM has founded, the Model T is launched, so that's important. Some more recent things like the Lotus Ford, the first rear-engine car to win at Indy in 1965, and the one everybody loves, the 67 Mark IV with Gurney and Foyt at Le Mans when Ford was taking it out against Ferrari in those days.
At one point, too, you had one of Juan Manuel Fangio's Grand Prix cars, Mercedes, from the mid-50s, 55, 56, or something like that. That was on loan to you, right, from Mercedes-Benz, and then they said, okay, that's enough. We're calling it back to Germany.
It was our car, believe it or not. And this opens up an interesting discussion about, what we have and why we have it. And that was one that we deaccessioned, which is a formal process where we kind of review what we have, and it has to get approved all the way up to the board of directors. We opted to remove that car from our collection because we really are focused on the American market and American innovation. So unquestionably a very important car, and it was a big attraction, but it just didn't fit what we were trying to do. So sometimes we do that. More often than not, we're bringing things in rather than taking them out, but it does happen.
Do you own all, or does the museum own all the vehicles, or do you have collectors or others that you switch things in and out with?
We do have some cars on loan. We talked about the Accord. We also have a few cars from our friends at GM who've loaned us some significant racing cars and production cars. And we'll bring things in for special events like our Motor Muster and Old Car Festival. But most of what you see when you go into the museum is from the collection of the Henry Ford owned by the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys at GM can't get you a Saturn? Come on. If you're watching,
there we go.
Get mad at Saturn.
What about EV1? Do you have one of those, GM's first electric car?
We do have an EV1. I love that car, and it's not an exaggeration to say it's the greatest electric car of the 20th century, but maybe not the greatest electric of all time anymore.
Are these cars all in runnable condition? Is that an important part for the museum or no?
It's a mix. A lot of what we have, we don't run on a regular basis, because to run a car, you kind of have to keep running it, and we'd be doing nothing but driving cars all day. Not a bad job, but we have other things to do. So
So Mike does. It's just
there you go. But for the most part, we drain the fluids, put the cars up on jack stands, et cetera, just for the long-term preservation. We do have some vehicles that will run on a semi-regular basis. Of course, we have a whole fleet of Model Ts we're running out in Greenville Village every day in the summertime.
That's a point for anybody who's never been to Greenfield Village, which is right next to the Henry Ford Museum, now just called the Henry Ford, right? So you can get rides in Model Ts.
Yeah, people always enjoy that. And I think they're moved not just by the car itself and the technology, but the experience of being in an open air touring car. And you start to realize that was a big selling point at the turn of the 20th century, right? Getting the fresh air, getting out there, feeling the breeze, seeing and being seen, frankly, riding in an automobile. Those were a big deal.
See, this is an interesting point, though. So if you go to Greenfield Village, you can also take a carriage ride, and you have these dray horses. I mean, these giant horses that are pulling people. And this gets back to the beginning when we were talking about how people thought that cars were noisy and smelly. And indeed, if you're walking through the village and those cars are noisy and smelly, but you've got to watch where you're walking, because the horses deposit things that could fill a city.
Absolutely. And we only have about 4 or 6 horses working in the village at any one time. And they do leave a bit of a mess. But the one thing we can't get across is, like, this is just a small portion of what you would have seen 120 years ago in this city. So it's tough to imagine today.
Man, we were talking about all these cars and things that you have on display. You guys have got some incredible records too, photography, documents, and the like. Is that available to researchers or others, or you tell the story?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've got a great collection of automotive history. The 2 core pieces, we have Ford Motor Company's corporate records going up to about 1953 or so. So right from the beginning, 1903, we have the literal articles of incorporation that Henry and Company signed to get the automaker off the ground there. But we also have the collections of Henry Austin Clark, who was a well-known automotive collector for many, many decades. And he collected a little bit of everything, a lot of published sort of consumer material, marketing materials, brochures, pamphlets. Those are a phenomenal resource, but a lot beyond automobiles as well. Great collection of trade catalogs, industry catalogs, et cetera. And yes, all of that is available for research by the public. You can make an appointment through our Benson Ford Research Center, and we can help you. If you're not in the immediate Southeast Michigan area, we can often help you remotely as well, get you what you need.
Is a lot of that digitized or not? I mean, can you search this online?
We are working on it. We've got more than 200,000 items digitized right now, which is great, but we have about 26 million items in the collection. So we got a little ways to go yet.
You got some job security in that, or somebody does.
All right, so John remembered the train. I remember that you have presidential limousines. Do you still have those?
Yeah, we still have those out on display. We have 5 different presidential vehicles. And yeah, to your point, 4 of them are Lincoln automobiles that were built for various presidents, going back to FDR right up to last one was built for Nixon and used through the first George Bush, believe it or not. And the best.
You also have the car that Kennedy was assassinated in.
Yes. And that's always astonishing when people see that. And you assume it would have been destroyed or locked away in a government warehouse somewhere. But no, in fact, after Kennedy was shot, they needed an automobile, and they figured it was faster to rebuild what they had than to start from scratch. So that car was completely stripped down, rebuilt, given a permanent roof, bullet-resistant windows, and armor, and all of that in about 6 or 7 months in a very quick fix, and then continued to be used right up through 1977.
No kidding, even though that was the car that Kennedy had been shot in.
Absolutely. And I've always read that Johnson in particular kind of avoided that car whenever he could, I think for obvious reasons. But
right.
Yeah, pretty astonishing.
In fact, maybe I'm confusing museums. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Doesn't the Henry Ford also have the chair that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in, replete with bloodstains?
You are correct. We do have that chair. And it's kind of coincidental that and the Kennedy limousine are both there. But Henry was a big admirer of Abraham Lincoln, so purchased a lot of Lincoln memorabilia. And the chair belonged to the Ford family, no relation, the Ford Theater family in Washington. And they sold it at auction, and he had the resources to buy it. So we've had it ever since.
Go into a little bit of, we're getting down to the end of the segment here. How did the Henry Ford Museum start?
Yeah, we're getting close to our 100th anniversary here. It was founded in 1929, and Henry envisioned it as a kind of living, breathing tribute to Thomas Edison, who was his great hero and friend. And his idea is that we shouldn't just be capturing history about the military or history about great leaders or politicians. It should be history of everyday life. So he collected a lot of common things and things that ironically are not so common anymore because they weren't saved. They weren't thought of as important. So,
but that's what I had always heard, is that Henry realized that the world as it industrialized was changing very, very rapidly. He also recognized that he was one of the culprits for that happening. And here was a guy who loved, bucolic rural scenes and the like, and wanted to capture that before it disappeared. And he knew it was going to disappear.
Yeah, it's the sort of great irony of Henry Ford and his work. You're right. He, more than anyone, is probably responsible for that transformation in the United States. But he wanted to preserve some of life as he knew it growing up in the 1860s, 1870s. So there's a lot of focus on that in our collections. But we've always collected things from the modern day as well and continue to collect modern innovations right to the present.
Okay, so let's go full circle on this. You mentioned that Henry and Thomas Edison were great friends. So why internal combustion rather than electric motors way back when?
Yeah, Henry was always a believer in internal combustion. His first car, the quadricycle of 1896, had an internal combustion engine, and he just thought gas was the best compromise fuel. It got you the most power for the weight that it was. I mean, batteries and electric motors tended to be very heavy and very expensive. Also got you great range. I mean, the best electric car of the 19 teens might get you 70, 80 miles on a charge under ideal conditions.
It's not bad.
Not too bad.
Yeah, but also that's at about 25 miles an hour.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
And a Model T gets 20 miles to the gallon, 10 gallon tank, 200 miles of range. So that's a big improvement.
So yeah, that's sort of
so Thomas and Henry didn't mix it up over what was the way to go?
But no, they didn't. I think Edison was a little disappointed that his batteries and electric cars in particular didn't last a little longer. But Ford did experiment with some electric cars, never went into production, perhaps never had any serious intention of producing them. But he and Edison did collaborate on a couple of one-offs.
So and you mentioned also the early tires failing on flat tires on these early vehicles. And Harvey Firestone was a friend of these guys too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Firestone had a contract to supply tires to Ford even before the Model T. And obviously he did very well for the Model T success, as did Henry. And the three of them had a great time going on those camping trips in the 19 teens and the early 20s.
Well, in fact, there's still a family connection there. So chairman of Ford Motor Company, Bill Ford's mother is a Firestone.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's still there.
Huh. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Look, we're going to have to wrap this segment up, but Matt Anderson, thanks so much for coming on. Very interesting. If any of you in the audience have not been to the Henry Ford, if you ever get a chance, go take it. It's an amazing museum. And
I'd say make a chance.
make a chance. And in fact, you could probably spend a week there and still not really fully absorb everything that's in the museum. There's so much to see.
Terrific. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Real good. We're going to take a quick break here. We're going to be coming back and talking about more automotive history.
Making a life full of memories, one road trip at a time. That's what really matters. Bridgestone Weather Peak tires with a 70,000-mile limited warranty.
All right, we're back, and we're making a guest change here. We're going to get a mic on our new guest right now, but we've got Steve Purdy here from Shunpiker Productions, right?
That's right.
Who has written a book. And Sean, I don't know if I'm holding it up right or not.
Yeah, I guess.
You got it on the screen here. So it's called Mascots in Motion.
Yes, a subtitle.
A hefty tome. I'll have you know, it's about 5 pounds.
5 pounder.
And it is jam-packed with all kinds of pictures of hood ornaments, grills, tail fins. Or you tell the story, Steve. You wrote the book.
Its subtitle is Images and Stories of Automotive Aesthetics. And it's 40 years of my photography of hood ornaments and other details of automotive design. I started doing those, 40 years ago or so, when I inherited kind of a high-end 35 millimeter camera with a 200 millimeter lens. And I discovered the Concours d'Elegance at Meadowbrook about the same time. And I went to the show, and when you're looking at cars through a long lens like that, it just kind of draws you into the details, like the hood ornaments and things like that, reflections, and because you're getting a close-up. And because of that, the compression factor of that lens, the background is blurred. It's got a narrow depth of
Focal
field,
point, yeah.
and so they ended up being kind of artsy. Well, in the early days, I'd go there with pockets full of film, and maybe 1 in 50 shots were keepers. But after doing that for a number of years, then I just kind of learned how to really get beautiful images. So, and about the same time, part of the Concours d'Elegance was the Automotive Fine Art exhibit. The Automotive Fine Art Society had their annual show there. So I got to know all of those guys and was influenced by people like Tom Hale and the major automotive artists. So that artistic influence and looking through that long lens, I went to the Concours every year and whatever other car shows I could find. And I was shooting blossoms and faces of animals and other things, but that long lens, but I was always drawn to those hood ornaments.
So how many pictures are in the book?
320 images, about 316 pages. And I've added about 50,000 words of text, just enough text to kind of put them all in context. Sometimes they're about the company, the company and what it meant about the car itself. Sometimes it's how I captured it, the image, and why I captured it, what drew me to that. So it's not a scholarly work and it's not an encyclopedic work. It's just those images that caught my eye over all those years.
And so you shot every one of these
Every
images.
one of them,
Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah,
So I
took me-
mean, you got 300 plus in here. You probably have a lot more in your
I
files.
have a lot more. The hardest part about doing that book was culling those thousands, tens of thousands of
So
images.
what was your criteria for going,
Well-
yes, this one goes in, that one, I'd love it, but I'm not going to put it in.
Well, I'm not very organized with my computer storage systems. So I would go to a car show that I had shot and I'd just kind of skim through the images and I'd see some of them would jump out at me and some of them wouldn't. So of those that jumped out at me, I'd kind of separate those and then I'd go through those again and then I'd go again and again. And I knew about how many I wanted for the book. So the hardest part was really deciding because, there were so many that caught my eye. And also when I started the book, it was going to be about hood ornaments. But when I started culling these pictures from all the car shows that I'd shot, a lot of other things jumped out at me, like this big Buick grill that became in the book a 2-page spread for those kind of things.
Cadillac tail fence.
Cadillac tail
59 Eldorado, right?
Yes, 59. There's a couple of images like that. In fact, one of the images in the book, one of the very few that I shot indoors without a flash, but indoors, was when the Cadillac, when GM had their Cadillac collection stored in a warehouse between when it was downtown and when they moved it out to the Heritage Center. And I snuck my way into the warehouse and got some good images. But it's just the tail fin of the Cadillac. But behind it, kind of blurred, was the Christmas tree that they had in the little museum that they had there. So that became my Christmas card for a couple of years. You may have got one of them, as a matter.
I think I do.
So Steve, you've taken these images in largely of details of vehicles. I mean, what vehicles have features that you'll not forget?
Well, I'll tell you, generally speaking, the 1950s cars are the most striking because they're the most unusual and the most high design. The 30s cars a lot of times looked alike, but you zoom in on the details and you find a lot of differences. The hood ornaments particularly are different from one to the other. But it's probably the 50s cars that are the most dramatic and the most striking and probably the most photogenic.
You sent us some photos ahead of time. I don't know if Sean, if you've been showing them, or should we pick out some and talk about them, or what?
Yeah, I've shown most of them. So
Oh.
Okay, well,
Well, I don't know which one. I don't remember which ones I saw.
yeah. So
Just go like
So
this.
you can- Yeah. So that one, take a look at that one. Now that's another example of what changed when I started the book. When I was thinking about hood ornaments, I came across an image like that.
where and the image is it's
Yeah,
got to
you-
be a grill of a car, right?
Yeah.
So
Can you
I-
tell
I
any
can
more
help.
about it? Maybe you can hold it up.
I can hold it up, but from the photo I cannot tell what this is.
Well,
at
the
all.
bar across the middle is the bar that locates the headlights on a 30s Duesenberg, early 30s Duesenberg. The patterns you see there are a result of the grill slats, some being tilted one way, some being tilted the other way. And for a photographer, the worst thing to shoot cars at a car show is a bright sunny day.
Yeah.
But in this case, what happens is the sun hits that bar and it makes those wonderful scallops go in both directions. So that's when I decided that I would include some abstracts the ones that you'd look at and have to kind of guess what they were. But they were just they struck my eye basically. Oh, there's a good one.
I don't know if I can turn to this
Oh.
page quickly or not, but you even have like an Oldsmobile ornament
Yeah.
and the photo's all rusted out and stuff. Here's a Ford
yeah.
one.
There you go.
That's all rusted out. So I mean, you're not just trying to go for beauty shots.
Oh no,
here.
these are at car shows and junkyards and backyards, wherever one of these jumped out at me, I shot them. In fact, let me tell you about one of my favorite spots in Middle Tennessee, right at the base of the Cumberland Plateau. There's an old guy that his livelihood was collecting 1950s cars and using it as a salvage yard. Put his kids through school that way. When I first ran into him, he's about 80 years old. He hadn't really been selling parts much. He was just playing with them all. But he had about 30 of them out in front of his place, and they're surrounded by a fence. And gosh, they're just all rusty and beautiful old 50s cars, nothing but 50s cars. So I asked him if I could shoot them, and so he let me shoot them. But then 20 years later, I went back again. Now he's 90-something. Couldn't come out to talk to me, but his son let me in there. And a lot of those ended up in the book because they're strikingly textured with rust and old paint. The young man painted some of those cars with house paint when he was a kid. But part of the charm of these details is, for one thing, the rusty ones. They really have a character. And the other is, and I was telling you about a sunny day being what a photographer doesn't like. What a photographer does like is a rainy day, because those shiny hood ornaments and the shiny cars and the paint and the details sparkle in that little bit of rain, and it adds a depth to that picture that's just strikingly beautiful, I think.
So Mike, at one point you were in this world sort of deeply when you were with Hemmings.
Yeah.
I mean, what is that culture of people who are interested in things like this?
I don't know exactly. I would say it goes deep. I mean, there's a lot of the details, especially when you get into pre-war cars. I mean, there's an obsessive museum like archaeology almost to. Yeah. They made, or if you get into more bespoke cars that might have changed their hood ornaments, right? It's that they made this one, from this year to this year, but then, you read it on the internet and there's different, conflicting stories of like, well, this one might have been this dated this year. And it just goes all the way down.
Yeah.
If model trains aren't enough for you, I'd say get into automotive ornaments.
I offer the disclaimer in the front of the book that I've captioned all these photographs of what car they were on, and I caution people not to take that for gospel, because often there are two different stories about when a hood ornament was used and when it wasn't used, and what one was used on which cars and all that kind of stuff. So previous books that I've done, I really enjoyed the writing, but I didn't enjoy the research that much. It was tedious. But this book, the research was as much fun as the writing.
Why?
Well, because every time I thought I knew a story, it seemed, and I went in to fact check it somewhere, I found out there was another story and maybe another story. And it led me deeper and deeper. And some of them ended up being really huge stories.
So tell us your favorite one.
Well, I'm glad you asked. Our friend Maureen McDonald.
Yes.
She and I are working on a historical novel about Eleanor Velasco Thornton, who was the model that posed for the Rolls-Royce hood ornament.
The Spirit of Ecstasy. Oh, no,
that's
kidding.
a big story. I talk about a lot of that in the book. Well, she thought that doing a historical novel about this young lady who was right in the middle of the first 15 years of automobiling in Britain, with King Edward the Seventh and Mr. Rolls and Mr. Royce and her paramour, Lord Montague, who started the first automotive magazine back in the day, would make a wonderful story for a historical novel. Well, Eleanor Thornton died in 1915 when she and her paramour, Lord Montague, were crossing the Mediterranean. He was going to India to be the Crown's transportation representative. She was going to go to Cairo, turn around and come back and run the magazine while he was gone. Well, as they were passing Crete, their pleasure boat was sunk by a German U-boat. She perished and he survived. And in the end, 20 years later, Lord Montague wrote in his memoirs a scene of them clinging tightly to each other as the boat was sinking, and a big wave came along and ripped her out of his arms, and she perished, and he survived for 3 days on an upturned lifeboat. So David Attenborough and Martin Scorsese bought the rights to a similar story, and they were going to produce a documentary in 2012, I think, but it was going to be centered on the founding of Rolls-Royce. Well, this would be the same story, but it would be centered on Eleanor Velasco Thornton.
I think your story is more interesting.
I do
I was
too.
going
I
to say,
do
what did the Lady Montague think when Lord Montague came home with a car that had his paramour's image on the hood?
She might have been in the passenger seat because Lord Montague's wife, back in those days, at the turn of the century, for a wealthy, powerful man to have a woman on the side, basically, to handle some needs, and the wife is at home taking care of all the other needs. They got to know each other, and they respected each other because Lord Montague's wife knew how valuable she was to him in running the magazine. She did road test reports with him. She was the manager of the office. She was the main clerk for the 1,000-mile rally in 1900, which kind of established automobiling in Britain as a thing. So it's really a wonderful story.
So hood ornaments led you to this story.
That's right.
That's amazing.
So that's the most fun one I get. But there's plenty of others like the Packard, the Pierce Arrow, the Archer. Mm-hmm. You've seen the Archer. Well,
like Cupid, kind
yes.
of, right?
That one was designed by a woman named her name's escaping me at the moment. She was the first full-time auto designer in Detroit. Essentially, she worked for the Turnstadt division, who designed a lot of these for the manufacturers, for all different manufacturers. Well, she used the janitor for her model and sent him to an archery school to make sure he had the right pose so she could sculpt him shirtless. And what was, oh gosh, I wish I could remember her name. What?
Rother?
No, that wasn't it. No. It'll come to me.
Well, the name's unimportant.
There's
the story
all kinds of those stories in this book that I found. The midge, the MG midge, and old MGs, you'll see what looks like a mosquito, about that high. And an aftermarket person in 1920 first produced those for MGs because the midge was sort of it sounded like midget, and that was the name of the car back then, the MG midget, basically. So they used this mosquito-like thing, and the company said, we don't want a pesky mosquito on our car, so we're not going to authorize that. But then the MG owners loved it so much that the company had to eventually produce it and sell it. So
I want to get back to the Spirit of Ecstasy. Okay,
yes.
So I mean, to this day, that is legendary.
Yes,
I mean, and Rolls-Royce continues to have photographers and models, and it's a living story. Of all of these hood ornaments that you've taken pictures of, I mean, that's got to be the most famous. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, they went away primarily for both stylistic reasons and for practical ones. In the 1950s, the late 1950s, the hood ornaments just kind of became badges, sort of. And part of it was safety issues because people would get impaled on them if you get hit by a car. And others were just plain stylistic. There's so much filigree on the car. I think the hood ornament itself became superfluous, basically. And probably the last ones that you could call that ended up on the fenders. There were one on each fender, and that was in the early 60s on some full-size Pontiacs and Oldsmobiles and things like that. So they just went away for both stylistic and practical reasons, I think. The Rolls-Royce hood ornament, which very classy and still exists now, on your Rolls-Royce, when you turn off the car, a little trap door opens and she folds down in under the hood. The trap door closes on top of her.
Yeah, because they became so desirable, people would steal them.
Yeah, and in the 60s, of course, the hippies would steal the Mercedes emblems off the hood of the car because it looked like a peace symbol if you turn it upside down. So,
what was the last hood ornament?
Well, the like we say, the Spirit of Ecstasy is still made. So I guess
still made. So okay, right.
So,
yeah.
but gosh,
I want to say Jaguar. Didn't they have the Leaper?
Bentley still has the Flying Bee on some of their cars.
Yes. And Maybach, is there still Maybachs being made? They still use a hood ornament. But the last ones that were on a car was probably the Jaguar. because they used a leaper even on the ones they made here in Detroit. The Jaguar S-Type, was that what they called it?
X-type.
No, the one that was built alongside the Lincoln LS in Wixom.
S-type.
S-Type, yeah, S.
Alongside the
What? I don't remember this.
Oh, don't you?
Jaguar
Oh,
was
yeah.
built in Detroit?
Yes. It was built on the same platform and the same powertrain as the Lincoln LS
and the
in Wixom.
Thunderbird.
And the Ford Thunderbird, yeah.
In
The
Wixom.
Wixom plant.
I don't remember that at
Oh,
all.
don't you? It was a nice looking car. I don't know if its quality was up to par, but I had an LS and the interior quality on that was pretty dismal. So maybe it wasn't enough quality, but that was when Ford still owned Jaguar, basically.
Right. Yeah.
So, so that went away, but yeah, hood ornaments are a wonderful thing, but it just led to so much other stuff when I did the book.
What do you think of today's cars then? I mean,
Well, a lot of people say to me, I've been reviewing cars for 20, 25 years. And when I drive down the road on a long highway drive, I'm looking in the rearview mirror and kind of challenging myself to see how far back I can identify that car or one company. So people say to me, cars all look the same these days. Well, if you went to the auto show and you strolled around slowly, you'd find some pretty interesting stuff. And it doesn't all look alike. But so much of it is evolutionary and not dramatic that it seems that way. Now, Hyundai and Kia, look at how they're leading design right now. You look at one of the new Hyundai, the Palisade or the Telluride. I mean, that's pretty striking.
they're very distinctive.
That doesn't look like other cars in its class. So the golden age of automotive design was probably, American automotive design was probably the 1950s, just because it was so varied. But in the classic area, the 30s was wonderful. But today, there's still quite a lot of variety out there if you look closely, I think.
Steve, if we go back to the hood ornament and the other details, it seems to me that at one point they were added to draw people to the vehicle as something particularly special.
Yes.
And a lot of that is gone by the wayside as they look for ways to reduce costs and make them more, well, maybe not more affordable, but at least less expensive.
Yeah, I don't know if the cost was the biggest issue. In the early days, when they still called them mascots instead of hood ornaments, because they were essentially like an athletic team's mascot, meant to reflect something about the brand, essentially. And so Pontiac, of course, had its Indian head, and that lasted in different forms, different styles, right up into the 1950s. Plymouth had the sailing ship. Same theme, lasted all the way into the 50s. Packard, on the other hand, had probably 6 or 7 or 8 different, totally different images for their hood ornaments. So those also were meant to say something about the elegance or the speed or the class of the car, something like that. But even Chevrolet and the lesser brands had some pretty fancy hood ornaments in their day.
Now, these all evolved from radiator caps.
Yes.
Is that not right?
That's true.
And then the first radiator caps actually had temperature gauges,
Yes.
so that when you're in the driver's seat, you could see if your engine
Yes.
was going to overheat or
That
not.
was called a Boyce motor meter. And I have a whole chapter on Boyce motor meters. What happened was Boyce invented that thing, and it got pretty popular because people wanted to see the temperature of their water and so forth. But it wasn't long before Packard and other companies started embellishing those motor meters with their little crest or their little design. Packard even put a whole hood ornament behind the motor meter in the latter days. But then in the 20s, temperature gauges moved inside the car. So they didn't need the motor meter anymore. But by then, it was really, it was accepted that they had to have some kind of a hood ornament. So that's when they became hood ornaments rather than mascots. Is essentially what the collectors would tell you.
So some of them were hood ornaments, some of them were just badges, but I think we're in this era when these sort of things are getting even more simplified and flattened. I think of
Yes.
like Volkswagen or Audi, Alfa Romeo, Cadillac even has simplified the crest. What's your feeling on that as a trend?
Well, it's essentially their logo or their look. The Audi has the 4 circles, and Mercedes has their star,
3-pointed star.
and so these badges still have their kind of logo look, basically, but they're badges. They're nothing more than badges, essentially. and some of them have some interest to them, some of them don't. I like the, as a guy who likes the aesthetics of it all, basically, I like the different designs that I see. Some Europeans have a little more artistic feel to them, and then Kia with their new KIA badge. I just love that because it was so simple and so classy. But yeah, the aesthetics of it are much simpler. They're much less artsy than they used to be.
What do you think, Mike? Is there an opportunity here? Because to just say it's got a badge, well, there seems to be an opportunity to connote more of what the spirit of the brand is all about and add some artistic flavor to it.
Yeah, I think the simplification is a mistake. And you look at, iconic badges, not necessarily hood ornaments, but Ferrari, Porsche, Lamborghini, they're still doing the same one, and they'll tweak it here and there, but they're not taking elements out or rendering it from an actual shape. They're not turning the horse into like some pixelated representation of the horse.
So I mean, do you think that automakers are doing that from a design perspective in order to make it seem as though they're more advanced? And consequently, I mean, so, you're mentioning, when Volkswagen went with its flat design for its logos, and a lot of that was influenced by the design on the iPhone in terms of what the app designs look like. And do you think they're trying to associate themselves more closely with technology?
Yeah, I think some of it is you want to be seen as current and modern, and it's change for change's sake. So it's, it's a very easy thing to say, well, we need to do something different. Well, we haven't updated the logo in 20 years. Let's do that. And some of that is a justified want to feel current. If you put the old like flowers and ducks, if you resurrected the 1980s Cadillac badge with the laurels on the side, that's going to look
dated,
kind of old, and not in a good retro way. Right. But I think they have gone a little too far to just say we're going to strip it of all of its decoration when by definition it is a decoration. So it should have a little bit of flair.
It's interesting. Think about, we were talking about Ford earlier. I mean, think about the Ford badge. I mean, his script, I mean, it's
not changed.
It's timeless.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, it's evolved over time, but
not much.
But not much. You still recognize it for the early one.
Yeah. I like the idea of increasing the stylized designs. Cadillac in their Celestique, was it? One of the recent concept cars, not the production version, but the concept car, had a wonderful little strip down the side, and inside that strip was a depiction of the Cadillac goddess that was the hood ornament for 30 or 40 years. She's done in plastic, she's done in an outline, but it's a reference to the
I love that idea. And with today's technology, there's a lot that you could do with badging to make it much more artistic and standing out. I'm thinking, I just saw a company just this week, I'm racking my brain. I see so many different things that has developed the technology to mold LED lights right into plastic badging, so that you can have not just a badge sitting there that's some sort of coated plastic, but is illuminated.
Right.
And you don't want to go too far. You don't want the Tokyo by Night School of Design, or it's doing all these different things. But there's got to be a way to really take badging to another level here.
They had a press conference some years ago with Giorgiaro, the young Mr. Giorgiaro, and I asked him at the end. I said, "What designs do you like and not like?" Or what do you like about design? And what you don't like about modern design? And he said, "Well, I really like the way that the different markets, the European market, the Japanese market, the American market, have their own language, their own design language." And he gave a couple examples of that. And I think that's true. Think of the Japanese, the little Japanese fun cars.
The K cars.
Well, the K style car. A lot of them look like an anime puppy, for goodness sakes. They're so cute. And that's a purely Asian design. You see those here if they import a few of them.
Yeah. So, no, not the K cars. They're very boxy and angular and all that. I think you're thinking of maybe if you remember the
Figaro.
Nissan,
Yeah.
Figaro or the Escargot. Those were fun designs.
Yeah.
Of course, that was back when Nissan was making money hand over fist.
And they made it a whole series. Those are the Zama cars. I think there might have been 4, but there were 3 different the escargot and the POW and the Figaro were all
Yes.
like, we're going to make fun things.
Yes, fun. And I thought
So
those
what
were
happened?
wonderful.
I mean, they
They
stopped
probably
having
didn't
fun.
sell.
Yeah, I haven't looked. I haven't refreshed my memory on that, but yeah, they stopped coming up
They-
with
they
ideas, or
were-
there was probably a financial crisis, or
Yeah, no, they were largely Japanese market only.
Yeah,
So
right.
they never were sold in the United States.
Well, the Figaro they
through-
brought a bunch over, I think, didn't they? I think
those
I'm
were
pretty sure
more
they did.
probably gray market cars.
Oh,
I'm guessing.
maybe.
I
I just
don't-
saw one at auction not too long ago.
Yeah, no, they're
Yeah.
really good looking cars, and
Cool looking cars. I
and they
just love
got
those little
great publicity for Nissan
Yeah,
the world
yeah.
over. But I think they were very niche. They never really sold in big numbers. I don't think they exported them much around the world as Nissan. Like I said, I'm sure there was a lot of gray market stuff that was
Yeah.
going on.
I think we actually had a POW in the studio that Chris Pockert drove here.
Yeah, Chris definitely big fan of the POW.
Mhm.
Yeah. So yeah, I modern design, I think it needs a little more personality, a little more panache.
So
Generally, but-
in your book, is it all American or are there European cars?
Well, I start out talking about motometers, then we go to a special chapter on Lalique. You know the Lalique?
Lalique glass.
Yes,
very
Lalique
famous.
glass. Lalique, Henri Lalique made, Rene Lalique, I think his name was, made 30-some different crystal hood ornaments for cars back in the 30s. And to find an original of those today is just because, of course, they were made out of crystal and you hit a big bump and they'd crack and break. They're still reproduced today, but all these 30-some versions, I've got a book on that I used for the research, but I've only seen a few, so I've got a chapter on them. But then I go into the Brits, and then to the continental Europeans, then to General Motors, then to Ford, Chrysler, and then a big chapter on American independence. And then I finish up the book with a little short chapter on trucks, because I had my designer said I had a few pages yet to spend, so
Got to have the Mack
I did.
Bulldog, I hope.
well, the Bulldog's in there, and also, my favorite one is on the Divco. Have you ever noticed you know what the Divco is?
no.
It's the little humpy milk truck. The Detroit Industrial Vehicle Company, they made that little humpy milk truck, the stand-up delivery truck, and it had the nicest little Art Deco hood ornament on it. So that's kind of the way. Well, the last image in the book, I wanted to end it with a little whimsy. So I had included an image I got in Jackson, Michigan at the car show. Somebody had a raggedy old pickup, and he had welded a little crowbar under the front of his hood. So it was also the hood pull and the hood ornament. So that's the way I ended the book.
Okay, we're getting down to the end here.
Yeah.
If people are watching the show and they go, dang, I'd like to get that, or
Yeah.
maybe it'd make a great Christmas present,
Yeah.
where can you get the book?
Well, I found that about 70% of the people who buy that book are buying it for gifts. It's only available on my website, not on Amazon or any of those sites.
Okay, so what's
It's
your website?
ShunPikerProductions.com. SHUNPIKER, Shunpiker.
So explain what
Productions.
Shunpiker is.
Well, a shunpiker is one who shuns the turnpike, takes the back road instead of the highway. In the spirits of Charles Kuralt, Jack Kerouac, and William
Right.
Least Heat Moon.
Turnpike is more of an East Coast kind of term. We would just call them highways,
Or,
right?
yeah, highway, yeah.
But I
So it's a
love
back
that.
road kind of guy.
Yeah.
I talk about that in the introduction to the book, that not all of my discoveries are on the back roads, but I think that's kind of a basic way to live your vehicular life, your travel life. When you see a sign that says road ends or dead end, you go down there and see what's down there, because there's bound to be something pretty interesting down there.
So shunpiker.com?
ShunPikerProductions.com.
Productions.com.
Yeah, only available there. It's $100, and I'll ship it anywhere in the country, and it'll always get a
And that's part of the
personalized
$100
signature.
price?
Yes, $100 price includes a personal inscription and shipped anywhere in the continental U.S.
Cool. It's
Great
a beautiful book.
Yeah,
Beautiful
yeah, great
shots
gift.
in there, too.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of work.
It was a lot of work. It took me 40 years to take the pictures, and it took me just a year to actually gather it up and get it to the designer. And I hired a company in Grand Rapids that does just art books. It's essentially an art book. That's what I wanted it to be. Company in Grand Rapids did the production, so it was printed in China, and he handled all that logistical stuff. And I'm glad I hired them, because they did a beautiful job.
It's a gorgeous book.
Yeah, thanks.
Congratulations.
With that, we're going to wrap it up.
Okay,
Steve Purdy, thanks so much for coming
thanks
on.
for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Mike Austin, great to have you here.
Appreciate
And
the invite.
where's that road and track issue? Let's get that up here again. We've actually got a physical copy, which I love, because, I don't know, the digital stuff is convenient, but
Yeah,
the printed version is so much better.
I agree. I don't get many magazines
Yeah.
these days, but I appreciate having one to hold on to.
And Gary, we won't be here next
No,
week.
we won't. We'll be eating
Next
turkey.
week is Thanksgiving. We're going to take that week off. But we hope all of you like this show. 2 weeks from now, we'll be right back here again.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.